Welcome to episode 5 of the Busy Aviation podcast, and today on the show I'm really pleased to welcome Matt Coles from Farm Strip Flying. Hi Matt, welcome to the Busy Aviation podcast. Many thanks for joining us today, and it's our first go, or my first go. I think it's probably both our first go at an interview type podcast.
Yeah, good evening, Chris.
So we'll have to see how this goes, and to the usual listeners, please forgive us if we stumble or we don't get this quite right. So Matt, we kind of met through the Busy Aviation website. I think I approached you because I'd seen Farm Strip Flying, and I wanted to get you onto the website because tailwheel flying is a passion of mine. Can you tell us a bit about Farm Strip Flying, how it started, how you got to where you are with it?
Sure, of course. Well, it started really, unfortunately, at the start of the pandemic. I was furloughed from my commercial job, and instead of going to find a sort of typical 9-to-5 job, I wanted to keep flying. And just like you, tailwheel flying is a passion of mine. So I went along to the bank to borrow some money and bought an aeroplane to do some instruction in.
Yeah, I think we had a quick chat before we started this, and quite an adventurous thing to do considering the state of aviation and what's happened. So what have you bought, and how are you using it?
So I'll rewind a little bit. When I was looking for an aeroplane, I wanted something that I could operate from short farm strips, but that was a fairly basic aeroplane, reliable, obviously carry 2 people and a decent amount of fuel for training. I looked at several types of aeroplanes. Some were far too expensive, and some just simply weren't available. I arrived at two choices, really. The Citabria, which is a real favourite aeroplane of mine. Fantastic machine, very capable, aerobatic, of course, and the Piper Cub. Now, I've always kind of liked the Cub. I'm aware of its cult following, but I didn't really realise how serious that was and how many people just simply love flying Cubs. Obviously, having flown it now for a while, I can totally understand the reasons behind that. But on paper, I think if you were choosing between the two, it would have to be the Citabria every time. But for me now, I've got this Cub and absolutely love it.
That sounds right. I've never actually flown in a Cub. Actually, there's one at the airfield, and I must try and get a go. When I did my tailwheel conversion, there wasn't anything available in Scotland, so I ended up doing it on a Pitts S2. But that's another long story.
The baptism of fire.
Yeah. Okay. So you've got the Cub now. I take it your background's in instructing anyway.
Sure. So I actually stumbled into instructing in my commercial job, just as a bit of career progression, really. Discovered that I really enjoyed it, loved the rewarding aspect of it. And so then basically got into GA instructing after that. So kind of the wrong way around, really. So yeah, I wouldn't say I've necessarily got a big background in instructing. I've just got a passion for seeing people enjoy flying and learning something at the same time.
Yeah, that sounds really great. And I know one of the things I was going to ask you about is we recently wrote an article about what to do next. And a lot of people get their PPLs, and they fly in a Cessna or a PA-28. And it's great and it's exciting and the journey's a lot of fun. And then the arrival sometimes afterwards, after a few months of having flown friends around and things like that, it can sometimes get a little bit boring for people and they tend to drop out. Do you see people come to yourself, for that next stage in their kind of PPL development?
So I get such a variety of people coming from airline pilots who want to get back into GA flying to people who, like you say, have just kind of exhausted the flight school post PPL aircraft hire, who just want to do something different. So yeah, real mix of people, really.
Yeah. That sounds great. And obviously the tailwheel flying, from my experience, I'm a very low tailwheel hourred pilot, so it's still quite an adventure for me. Every time I set off, I'm probably always thinking about the landing more than anything else.
Yeah.
What's the top tips really that you would have for an aspiring tailwheel pilot? No, I don't want you to explain the whole tailwheel conversion or qualification, but
sure. No, well, I think the reason, number one, the reason the tailwheel conversion exists is because they are challenging aeroplanes to fly. And again, without going into too much detail, because of where the center of gravity lies on the aircraft, on the longitudinal axis of the aeroplane, they are inherently unstable. So it is a challenge to sort of master the control of it, particularly on the ground and the takeoff and landing phase. So it offers someone who perhaps is a little bit bored after doing some flying, a new challenge, really. And for those who aren't just after a challenge, who just want to improve their flying, actually taking it back to basics, the real sort of stick and rudder, seat of your pants type flying, it can actually really improve your skills when you go back into like a school aeroplane. You find yourself, well, certainly people who I've taught with a tailwheel conversion find themselves actually looking at the balance ball, using their feet during turns, all simple things which you may not realise that you're not doing as a nose wheel pilot. But yeah, it just offers people a bit of a different challenge, really. And of course, in the Cub, there's the added appeal of it being a vintage aeroplane. The one that I operate has got military history, so it served in the World War. So people like that sort of side of it as well.
Yeah, I fully agree with what you say there. I haven't flown a tricycle undercarriage or a nose wheel aircraft for a couple of years since I've had my aircraft, and certainly going back to do my biennial in a PA-28, it seemed quite easy having a couple of years under my belt of flying. I fly the RV3 as we discussed earlier, and I think it really does improve your skills, and something I would really encourage everyone at least to go and have a go at. Whether it would, I would certainly say go and have a go with yourself at farm strip flying in a Piper Cub. I certainly wouldn't say leap in and go into an S2A, which is what I did, because that is really a baptism of fire, and I can talk a whole podcast about that. That's really great. And the farm strip flying side of it, what does that entail, Matt?
So I kind of I operate from a farm strip, essentially, and for me, one of the joys of this kind of flying is the freedom that it offers. Controlled airfield, where taxi times can be long. You've got to wait ages for clearances. Go through the whole ATIS procedure. You can literally jump in the aeroplane and off you go. Of course, there are some increased risks associated with that kind of flying, and so the farm strip element to the training that I offer, and I do get people who are tailwheel proficient who just want to come and do some flying into various farm strips. It highlights some of the risk factors and some of the extra considerations that you need to make as a pilot before operating into these more challenging environments. A lot of these strips are shorter than what one might be used to landing on. Lots of different surfaces, obstacles around, all sorts of things that just make it, again, a more challenging type of flying.
Yeah, and again, something that's really very different to what a lot of people, I suppose, are used to, that are flying out of airfields, that even getting onto grass, because a lot of us have never really flown a lot from grass, and it's a whole, not completely different, but a lot more factors to think about, and sometimes I think a lot more fun as well.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, definitely. It kind of takes you back to aviation's roots as well. You can think about the guys who kind of pioneered aviation, who went before us. They wouldn't have had kilometre-long runways made of nice, smooth concrete.
Yeah, and when you think that everything was virtually tailwheel, you look back and you see the Spitfire guys, the Hurricane guys, that were 10 hours in, and they were controlling. And we make obviously quite a big deal now about flying a tailwheel, but although they were generally operating from airfields that were just big grass fields, and you took off into wind. But it's quite amazing, really, when you think what they were in charge of, and how, sometimes how not tricky, but how much attention these aircraft require. Yeah. I have no idea what a Spitfire's like to fly on. I don't know. It's normally what they're like on the ground, isn't it? What they're like to fly. Yeah. That's really great. You mentioned I don't want to rub salt into the wound or anything, but you mentioned obviously you've come to farm strip flying and the aircraft you've got and the school and everything you're doing because at the moment you're furloughed from a commercial job. Can you tell us a little bit about where you were just before this awful pandemic struck?
Sure. So I grew up always wanting to fly. Fortunately, I had the support of a family member who was a general aviation pilot who sort of helped encourage me down the flying route. So I didn't go to university straight from school. I went to a flying school to get my commercial license. I was very fortunate, got a job with a low cost airline that I worked for 8 years before moving on to my current employer, flying the 747 long haul around the world. Unfortunately, that's been put on hold shortly while this pandemic takes effect.
Yeah, but it's quite interesting. And again, I say I don't want to. Yeah, it's not a great situation to be in for lots of people at the moment. And we've been chatting before we went to record about friends that are in a similar situation, and it's still not good. Although it does seem that there is a small recovery. So the 747, of course, is an absolute classic, and you're probably one of I would say fairly exclusive club that's flown it. What's your favourite thing about the 747? I'd love to know, because it's always one of those aircraft that's fascinated me. I flew to Japan when I was 17, and that was I think it's been the only time I've been on a 747. But it was in the days when you could get onto the flight deck I think it was with British Airways at the time, and it's an amazing aircraft. So, is there something really special about that aircraft?
I mean, it's obviously, as you've mentioned, it's a very iconic aeroplane. The shape of it is one that people who have no connection to aviation recognise as a jumbo jet. I think for me, it's one of those, like someone's favourite classic car. You walk away from it and you can't help but turn around just to look at it. Now, I promise you, I'm not an aviation nerd. I do love aeroplanes, but
I think it's okay. I think we probably both are.
Okay, it's just one of those things, and you would find yourself regularly after a 10 or 12 hour flight through the night home, absolutely shattered, just walking away from the aeroplane at the end of it and turning around, and sometimes even just taking a photo of it, just because it was such a beautiful machine.
Yeah, it is as well, isn't it? And it's one of those ones when you stand at the bottom of something like that, and you can't really put yourself until you actually see it at the bottom of the steps. I know the A380 and stuff like that, it's probably a lot bigger, but still the jumbo, when you stand there, you think, how does this fly? And I imagine for someone like you, when you've actually been at the controls of it, I know when you're sat on a flight deck, it could be any size of aircraft generally behind you, but it's still something, a bit of an awe really, that this aircraft flew. And of course it's quite an old, and it's quite an old aircraft, so the technology is amazing, really.
Yes, yeah, it's a fantastic aeroplane to fly. It really was brilliant.
So you mentioned that you got helped into GA by a family friend, and that's really been your passion. But if you were given a chance, probably not the right time to ask this question, but if you could do anything else, what would you like to do? Or is there anything else that you'd like to do?
Yeah, so it's quite an easy question for me, actually, because alongside, again, goes back to the farm strip flying element. I actually run a small farm, so very different, very contrasting careers, if you like, and I wouldn't want to have one without the other. Going from the sort of mental workout that is flying an airliner to being outside in all the wind conditions, rain conditions. It's just something so different about it that I like. So if I was to do anything else, I would be a farmer, and that's not because the wage would be anywhere near as good. No, it's just one of those things that I would just love to do.
That is really interesting, actually, and of course the combination of having a strip and a farm strip is just absolutely spot on. That's really interesting, Matt. And we spoke about the career path. If you had, one of the things we've been looking at Busy Aviation as well is just helping people into aviation, and particularly trying to get younger people into aviation, because you only have to look around the average club or GA club these days, that it's really an aging population that are flying aircraft. One, because they're very expensive. What advice would you give to somebody, say a youngster who wants to maybe take the commercial route, or maybe just wants to fly for fun? Is there one small piece of advice you might have for them?
I think you've mentioned probably the biggest restriction to aviation, whether that's commercial or GA stuff, is the cost. And I think if you really, really want to do something, be prepared to go and sweep the hangar floors. Keep knocking on people's doors. Go to flying clubs. See if you can wash aeroplanes in exchange for a bit of flying. If you really want to do it, you'll figure a way. And make friends with people. You mentioned that the population, if you like, of most flying clubs is quite old. But I know older people in flying clubs who'd love the opportunity just to sit next to someone, even if it means you can't log the time yourself. Just go and have the experience, go and enjoy it, and you might learn something. Which, if you then go on to be a commercial pilot, you could learn something. From sitting next to someone who's been there and done that a few times or made the mistakes.
Yeah, I think you're right, and I think looking at certainly the club that I'm a member of, we very rarely see people that will just come and knock on the door. And I certainly know that when I was starting out in flying, when I was in my teens, I would do anything to get flying, and that meant, as you said, we always say sweep the hangar floor and stuff like that, but there genuinely is a desire to help youngsters into the sport, into the hobby, and into the profession.
I can imagine that for particularly young people, it's quite a daunting experience walking in somewhere like a flying club where things are very established. People have got their own little groups or whatever. But like we've said, people are often friendly and willing to help out. So just try it, and if you're applying for jobs, having got some flying, then just keep being persistent. Go to make friends and create relationships with people, because you never know how that relationship might benefit you in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and there are opportunities out there, and there's actually a lot of more opportunities than I think people think there are, particularly in terms of sponsorships and courses and scholarships. You've only got to do a search of Google, and you can find quite a few from the Honourable Company of Air Pilots, of which I'm a member, and the Air League.
That's it. I've just did a tailwheel conversion for a young lady who won the Air League scholarship. Came down from Scotland actually to fly the Cub. So there are things out there.
Yeah, absolutely. You've just got to go out. You have definitely got to go out and find them. But they are there, and in some respects, I think from my experience, there's probably more available now than when I was starting out. It was really a case of, as you said, having to knock on doors. But there are lots of opportunities. That's really great. No, thanks for that. It's really good advice. If there is and this isn't farm strip flying, or maybe it is farm strip flying. If there was a common myth about your job, what would you think it is? That everyone thinks something about pilots. What do you think that myth is?
I think for people who are not in aviation, this myth that the autopilot button is a turn it on and go to sleep thing. It's the autopilot.
Although when I did go on the 747 flight deck, they were all reading the newspaper, so I do have to say,
stop that! You can't. No, that's just a very sort of common myth that I find with people who ask about airline flying is can you just turn the autopilot on and go to sleep?
Not legally, no. Yeah, and again, autopilot flying again, even into GA now is it's taken over a little bit. People I fly with, my aircraft doesn't have anything like that. The autopilot's the stick between my knees, probably like it is in the even modern GA aircraft, particularly home built, are all being fitted with autopilots. And some people will say it takes some of the fun out of it. I think if you fly for a living, sometimes you really don't want to go and fly something that's going to just fly on the autopilot.
Well, this is it, and there's definitely something to be said for the amount of technology that's going into modern aviation. Even the flight schools nowadays are teaching GPS as a sort of a staple for the flight training syllabus. And another reason why I set up this farm strip flying was because I was finding I do some PPL instruction, some general GA instruction as well. And also in the airline world as well, there's an increasing reliance upon automation and technology, and the sort of stick and rudder skills, the basic skills that may well get you out of trouble one day, are kind of dwindling a little bit. I don't allow any GPS or instrument flying in the cover. It's all stick and rudder. So
I suppose in the Cub though, you're not travelling at huge speed, so the area that you're going to cover is a little bit more limited than something like I know you fly an RV as well as I do, and you're probably doing twice the speed at least in an RV, and you can get yourself lost a lot quicker than you can in a Cub, I would imagine. Yeah. No, that's really that's really great, and again, it all harks back to the farm strip flying, the Cub. It's just a different way of flying, and I have a friend who flies a Cub, and he has an RV as well, and he just loves just pootling around and uses it. His aircraft was another Second World War veteran that was used for photography, and that's what he still uses it for. He just loves going up with the window open and taking photographs.
I know that you were talking about sort of like what route do people take after they've got their PPL, what's next sort of thing. And there's definitely something to be said for going on to do instrument ratings, things that may well benefit you if you want to go into a commercial, down the commercial route. But for me, number one, this skill element, as we've spoken about with tailwheel flying, but also on a summer's evening with the door open, flying at 500 feet around the British countryside, you just can't beat it.
No, it's gorgeous, and of course you live in a kind of iconic part of the country as well, where I suppose we all hark back to the days when there were grass airfields everywhere, and you can just imagine all these Cubs and stuff and Osters and stuff just floating around, puffing around, as opposed to racing around like sometimes we do in RVs, etc.
Well, it gives you an appreciation for, like you say, the wonderful country that we live in.
Absolutely. So for farm strip flying, do you have any other plans for it? I know you may be in this kind of crossroads with the commercial world as well, but do you have any other plans?
So ultimately, I will go back to work as an airline pilot. We'll keep running this alongside it, and who knows, it may well even overtake it one day. I don't want to get too big too quickly. I just enjoy imparting a little bit of knowledge, a little bit of fun, and some skill onto the people that come to fly it. The most important thing for me is that people, they have fun and they enjoy the airplane, they enjoy the flying, because flying is, as we've mentioned, increasingly expensive. So to spend, hundreds of pounds doing something that you don't enjoy, in my mind, is just totally pointless. So I want people to have fun and enjoy it. So I will keep, and because I enjoy it as well. I think as we were speaking about before, I get such a buzz out of seeing people enjoy flying and maybe learning a little bit at the same time. So I will keep doing it. Maybe one day there might be more airplanes purchased, and it might turn into something bigger. But one of the, as I've mentioned, one of the basics, it's a real romantic, vintage style of aviation, and I don't want it to become a huge, great big commercial flight school. There's something to be said for t-shirt and shorts and open door, like I said, just back to basics.
Yeah. I think you're conjuring up a really nice image there. I think I need to come down.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe I need to be taught how to fly a tailwheel properly. That's really great, Matt. It's been really great having you on, and thank you very much for being really my first guinea pig at one of these interview podcasts. I think there's been some really interesting stuff that's come out. If we want to find Farm Strip Flying, the website.
Sure. So we're at www.farmstripflying.co.uk. We're on social media on Facebook and Instagram, so feel free to search for us there at Farm Strip Flying, and you'll be able to see some of the photos of what we get up to.
You can find Matt's site on Busy Aviation as well. And as I say, I followed Matt on Instagram as well, and there are some lovely photographs that come up and just conjuring up those images that we've just talked about, which I really enjoy looking at. One last question for you, Matt. We're going to start this. Apparently, every podcast interview has a standard question at the end that people always throw, and we're going to, hopefully, I'm going to ask this to everyone. I don't know if it's an easy one or a difficult one, to be honest. I mean, these are strange times for everybody. Where do you think, or what do you think the world will look like in 5 years' time? And you can answer that in terms of aviation or just anything.
It's a really difficult question because, I mean, who'd have predicted COVID, really? I would really like to think that certainly aviation is back operating somewhere near the scale that it was operating on before the pandemic. They always say that the aviation industry is quite cyclical, so I hope that we're certainly on an upturn in the next 5 years or so. There tends to be a sort of trend towards the degradation of terms and conditions for commercial pilots. So I'd like to see professional pilots being rewarded and appreciated to the extent that they deserve for the hard work that they've put in to achieve that. As far as the world is concerned, I couldn't possibly say. As long as Gloucester Rugby are on top, I'm happy.
I think that's a brilliant way to end, Matt. And thank you so much for being on. Thank you for being our guest. I've really, really enjoyed it. Hopefully, maybe next year, and we'll catch up with you again and see if any of your predictions or other things have come true. And hopefully, you might be back in the left or right hand seat of something a bit bigger.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chris.
Cheers. So a big thank you to Matt from Farmstrip Flying. As Matt says, you can find his website at www.farmstripflying.co.uk, or you can just search for the link at www.busyaviation.co.uk. Take a look at the show notes where you'll find some more details of the topics we've talked about. And if you like the show, please do add a like or a review on your favourite podcasting software. And to find out more about Busy Aviation, it would be really great if you could just sign up for our newsletter. You'll find a link on the website. If you want to list your aviation business and maybe appear on this podcast, just let us know. Safe flying until next time.